Hi, and welcome to the regularly scheduled podcast for Gordon Clark Discussions. This is our official shop talk for the Gordon Clark Discussions Facebook group. We talk about theology and other topics in social media and the news. I'm your host, the BFG, a.k.a. the big fan of Gordon Clark, a.k.a. Romans 918. Thank you for joining. Well, we're here in part 4, which is also the final part of the series of the Fundamentalist-Modernist Controversy of the early 20th century. And wow, what a ride it has been. Let's see how things finish up here. And we'll have a little bit of op-ed or thoughts about the whole controversy after we get done with the essay. Please enjoy.
A reading of the Wikipedia article, Fundamentalist-Modernist Controversy. Text is available under the Creative Commons, Attribution Share Alike license. Our thanks to the contributors and authors at Wikipedia for the use of this article. Following the reunion of the Old School and New School in 1870, Princeton Theological Seminary remained the bulwark of Old School thought within the Presbyterian Church. Indeed, by 1920, it was arguably the only remaining Old School institution in the Presbyterian Church. The majority of the faculty in 1920 remained convinced Old Schoolers, including J. Gresham Machen and Gerhardus Voss. However, to combat a perceived lack of training in practical divinity, a number of more moderate New Schoolers were brought in, including Charles Erdman and J. Ross Stevenson, who by 1920 was the president of the seminary. As was noted earlier, the tension between the Old School and moderates revealed itself in debates about the proposed church union of 1920, Machen's anti-liberal preaching which resulted in the public fallout with Harry Van Dyke, the controversy about Erdman's approach to the League of Evangelical Students, and splits about how to deal with the splits in the wider church. By 1925, the Old School's majority on the faculty was threatened, but the selection of Clarence Macartney to replace outgoing professor of apologetics William Green seemed to solidify the Old School majority on the faculty. However, when Macartney turned the job down, Machen was offered the job. Before he could accept or refuse, however, the General Assembly intervened, and in the 1926 General Assembly, moderates succeeded in securing a committee to study how to reconcile the two parties at Princeton. The seminary was governed by a board of directors, subject to the supervision of the General Assembly. On a side note, some members of the General Assembly seem to have been wary of Machen because of his opposition to prohibition. The committee reported back at the General Assembly of 1927, where the moderate Robert E. Speer was elected as moderator. Their report concluded that the source of the difficulties at Princeton was that some of the Princeton faculty, such as Machen, were trying to keep Princeton in the service of a certain party in the church, rather than doing what was in the best interest of the denomination as a whole. They recommended reorganization of the seminary. The General Assembly renewed the committee's mandate and ordered them to study how to reorganize the seminary. This led Machen to declare that the 1927 General Assembly was probably the most disastrous meeting, from the point of view of evangelical Christianity, that has been held in the whole history of our church. Machen composed, and had circulated in the denomination, a document entitled The Attack upon Princeton Seminary, a plea for fair play. He argued that Princeton was the only seminary continuing to defend orthodoxy among the older theological institutions in the English-speaking world. The loss of the seminary would be a major blow for orthodoxy. The moderates and liberals already had control of pretty much every seminary in the denomination. Why couldn't the conservatives be left with one? The committee reported to the 1928 General Assembly, held in Tulsa, Oklahoma, recommending reorganizing the seminary, to give more powers to the president of the seminary, and to replace the two ruling boards with one unified board. In response, Clarence Macartney responded that his party were prepared to take legal action to stop this from happening. Wary, the General Assembly appointed a committee to continue studying the matter. This committee reported to the 1929 General Assembly. Mackin gave a fiery speech on the floor of the General Assembly, but he could not prevent it from voting to reorganize the seminary. Rather than contesting this decision in the courts as had been threatened, Mackin now decided to set up a new seminary, to be a bastion of conservative thought. This institution would become Westminster Theological Seminary, named to stress its fidelity to the Westminster Confession of Faith, and several conservatives on the Princeton faculty, including Mackin, Cornelius Van Til, Robert Dick Wilson, and Oswald Thompson Ellis, would leave Princeton to teach at Westminster. Clarence Macartney initially opposed setting up Westminster, arguing that conservatives should stay at Princeton, where they could continue to provide an orthodox voice. Mackin responded that Princeton was in a state of apostasy, and that he couldn't serve alongside apostates. Macartney was eventually won over to Mackin's side.
As a result of the departure of Mackin, and the denominational conservatives, especially of the old school, the shape of the Presbyterian Church in the USA, as a modernist, liberal denomination was secured. The PCUSA would eventually merge with the United Presbyterian Church of North America in 1958 to form the United Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, and in 1983, the UPCUSA would merge with the Presbyterian Church in the United States. The Southern Presbyterians, who had split with the PCUSA in 1861 due to the Civil War, to form the current Presbyterian Church, USA. The dispute between the fundamentalists and modernists would be played out in nearly every Christian denomination in the United States. By the 1920s, it was clear that every mainstream Protestant denomination was going to be willing to accommodate modernism, with the exception of the Presbyterians, Southern Baptists, and the Missouri Synod Lutherans, where the situation was still unclear. The departure of Mackin and other conservatives brought the Presbyterians into the camp willing to accommodate modernism. This left the Southern Baptists and the Missouri Synod as the only large, national denominations where Orthodox Christians were still active within the denomination. Conflict would continue to roil both churches for most of the 20th century, and the triumph of Orthodox Christianity in those denominations would not be secure until the Semitic Schism in the Lutheran Church, and the later Southern Baptist Convention conservative resurgence.
And there you have it. Part 4 of our essay. Working through what happened when push came to shove. And as the essay noted, I think somewhat accurately, the day was really principally carried by the modernists across the board. If by carried one means, got control of the seminaries, got control of the denominations, and changed their foundations, moved onward and upward, as it were, to the new thing. And for this I partly fault conservatives. Conservatives at that time were absolutely horrible political animals. They were not good at all at getting things done cooperatively in representative assemblies. They seemed incapable of compromise and working through and with other people on issues. I don't want to make it sound like the conservatives of this time were without any blame in this controversy. Also, it's true that a lot of them were very reactionary and had positions that were really nonsensical. Now, of course, I'm talking about positions that are, for example, extra confessional, apart from the Westminster Confession of Faith, for example, which was the creedal document at issue during this discussion. And so the conservatives, in a very large way, contributed to their own demise by being so disagreeable and hard to get along with. Now, having said that, what are we to think of theological liberalism? Well, let's take a contemporary example and consider it in the light of our series. So before I read from someone today who I believe is a contemporary voice of theological liberalism, let's just go back and review some of the history. So liberalism got its start around the time of the early Enlightenment. So around the time of Kant and Schleiermacher over in Germany. As Kant started to postulate this sense of autonomy as the basis for a rational being, Schleiermacher, in the religious space, started to postulate that truth was ultimately not to be found in a place higher than one found it in one's own self. So the scriptures, the creeds, the confessions, they could perhaps testify to some things about religion that may or may not be true. But you would measure and evaluate those things against your own inner voice, against your own heart. What does your heart tell you is the truth about this situation? And so from those beginnings in the early Enlightenment and down to the present, we really see the outcropping and the outworking of the engagement between the two streams of thought. Liberalism really does presume some sort of Darwinian ascent of man. You know, some sort of narrative that talks about how we once believed foolish things, like the Bible, before we were more advanced and modern and scientific like we are today. That's the story. You hear it as an article of faith from liberals. And so let's look at a contemporary theological liberal. So I'm reading from Rob Bell, from his work, Velvet Elvis. He says, for thousands of years, followers of Jesus, like artists, have understood that we have to keep going, exploring what it means to live in harmony with God and each other. The Christian faith tradition is filled with change and growth and transformation. Jesus took part in this process by calling people to rethink faith and the Bible and hope and love and everything else, and by inviting them into the endless process of working out how to live as God created us to live. Do you see the liberal thesis? Jesus took part in the process. That doesn't sound very much like the fundamentalist position, which says not only did Jesus take part in the process, but he is the absolute cornerstone. Who he is in his divine person and what he has done on the cross is absolutely everything. Now here's the issue. 200 years after the theological liberal revolution, the liberals are, quite frankly, cosmic jello when it comes to the person of Jesus. Ask them who they think Jesus is. Rob Bell here says Jesus took part in some larger picture. Other liberals will say he was a good example. He was a great teacher. He illustrated better morals to a people in a darker time and encouraged them to move up in the ladder. Is that really the Jesus of the Bible? Oh, wait. We forgot. The theological liberals have reminded us that the Bible isn't even really a reliable source for information about Jesus. How then does Mr. Bell know what Jesus is or his place in history? Rob Bell continues, times change. God doesn't, but times do. We learn and grow, and the world around us shifts. And the Christian faith is alive only when it is morphing and changing, innovating, letting go of whatever has gotten in the way of Jesus. During the time that we've been studying here, the early 20th century, here were the 5 things that got in the way of Jesus. The 5 fundamentals. Number 1, the inspiration of the Bible by the Holy Spirit. Nope, that gets in the way of who Jesus really is, according to the liberals. And the inerrancy of Scripture as a result of this. Nope, the Bible is riddled with errors, full of fantasy, myth, legend, the fallible work of human authors, and only that. Point 2, the virgin birth of Christ. That gets in the way of who the real Jesus was. And of course, it must be hard to our modern sophisticated ears to think that that could actually be true. Number 3, the belief that Christ's death was an atonement for sin. Oh yeah, that's right. Now that we're more modern, we recognize that people are basically good. And there's no real sin to atone for. So that when Christ died on the cross and suffered a most horrific earthly punishment, in addition to a divine punishment, well, he did so certainly not for us moderns. Point 4, the bodily resurrection of Christ. We can't believe that. That goes against science. That goes against common sense. Point 5, the historical reality of Christ's miracles. Again, science. If I just say the word science enough, I'm sure that a conservative faith can only crumble. Rob Bell continues, I'm part of this global, historic stream of people who believe that God has not left us alone, but has been involved in human history from the beginning. People who believe that in Jesus, God came among us in a unique and powerful way, showing us a new kind of life. Of course, this unique and powerful way wasn't the virgin birth. And we don't know that by the inspiration of the Bible. And of course, it wasn't a unique and powerful bodily resurrection. And it wasn't a unique and powerful historical reality of Christ's miracles. I mean, those are the 5 fundamentals that the liberals couldn't agree to affirm. Rob Bell continues, Jesus is more compelling than ever, more inviting, more true, more mysterious than ever. The problem isn't Jesus. The problem is what comes with Jesus. Well, here's my question. If we don't have a testament that has any reliability, how do we know that Jesus is more compelling than ever. Where do we get this knowledge? And if we get them from the Scriptures, these error-filled Scriptures, then how does Rob Bell know that that's the case? More inviting, more true, more mysterious than ever. How mysterious are the Scriptures really? I mean, read them. The virgin birth of Christ. A sign will be given so that you know he is the Son of God. Rejected. Rob Bell continues. For many people, the word Christian conjures up all sorts of images that have nothing to do with who Jesus is. Okay, we're back to the 5 fundamentals. These are the 5 points that have, in the liberal mind, nothing to do with who Jesus is. The inspiration of the Bible, the virgin birth of Christ, the belief that Christ's death was an atonement for sin, the bodily resurrection of Christ, the historical reality of miracles. None of those things are affirmable by liberals. And so these are the things that are outmoded and outdated, and according to Rob Bell and other liberals, must change. For others, the painting works for their parents, or it provided meaning when they were growing up, but it's no longer relevant. It doesn't fit. It's outdated. He's talking about the conservative fundamentalist doctrines. I would repeat the 5 points again, but it's a bit embarrassing. It's not that there isn't any truth in it, Rob says, or that all people before them were misguided or missed the point. It's just that every generation has to ask difficult questions of what it means to be a Christian here and now, in this place, at this time. Wow. What did it mean to be a Christian? Well, in the liberal narrative, some people had this painting of these 5 fundamentals. But you know, we sort of make our own paintings. And if you don't like the one painting that your parents painted, why don't you paint your own? Now, is that accurate? Is that fair to Rob Bell? I hope it's charitable. I hope it's fair. From this conservative's vantage point, it really does seem to me that liberals need to be challenged on these points. For the kind of Christianity that they propose really does seem to be a Christless Christianity. It seems to be a supernatural religion without the religion or the supernatural components. And that, my friends, was the whole point the fundamentalists were trying to make the whole time. Thanks for listening. This is Romans 9:18.